the priests of this temple, they made like a business to sell the small statues, amulets. So they used all these tombs as the storerooms to keep the mummified cats.
Every morning, a priest walked the length of the temple at Bubastis and counted the dead. Not people, North African wildcats, hundreds of them, killed since the previous dawn and wrapped in linen still stiff from the embalming table.
Because the priests in this time mummified the cats by millions.
By midday, pilgrims from across Egypt arrived carrying silver coins, each paying for a bundle of their own, a votive offering to the goddess Bastet. Across the centuries of the cult's height, archaeologists estimate the total reached into the millions. This isn't a scene from a horror story. It's documented operational reality from Egypt at the height of its power.
I think modern people think that the ancient Egyptians worshipped all cats, which is absolutely not true.
Yeah.
They liked them, but they worshipped the ones that were supposed to be sacred.
And in November 2025, 2 studies gave scientists something they'd never had before: solid DNA evidence tracing the ancestry of every house cat alive today back to a single wild population. What they still can't agree on is why that population became tame in the first place. For almost 2 decades, the scientific consensus on cat domestication was settled. Cats were first tamed in the Near East, roughly 10,000 years ago, alongside the earliest farming societies. The story was elegant, almost intuitive. Grain stores attracted rodents, rodents attracted wildcats, and farmers tolerated the wildcats hanging around. Over generations, the tamest individuals stayed closest to human settlements, and their offspring inherited that tolerance. Domestication by accident, a mutual arrangement that suited everyone. In 2007, a team led by Carlos Driscoll at the National Cancer Institute in the United States published the genetic evidence that appeared to confirm it. They tested nearly 1,000 cats, wild and domestic, across the Near East and Central Asia, and every domestic cat sampled traced back to the Near Eastern wildcat population of the Fertile Crescent. For 18 years, that finding sat at the center of every textbook account of how the cat came to live alongside us. The science seemed settled. It was not. On November 27, 2025, Marco De Martino, a researcher at the University of Rome Tor Vergata, published a new study in the journal Science, the same journal that had printed the old consensus 18 years earlier. His team examined 87 cat genomes, ancient bones from archaeological sites, museum specimens, and modern wildcats from Europe, North Africa, and Anatolia, spanning more than 10,000 years. Where the older studies had relied on mitochondrial DNA, genetic material, passed only through the maternal line, De Martino's team analyzed nuclear genome data, the complete genetic blueprint inherited from both parents, an entirely different level of resolution. The bones that archaeologists had been calling early domestic cats for decades weren't domestic cats at all. Animals cataloged for years as early house cats carried the genetic profile of European wildcats, a wild species with no ancestral connection to the domestic lineage. Wildcat skeletons and domestic cat skeletons look almost identical. Without DNA, there's no reliable way to tell them apart. One by one, the old evidence collapsed. A supposed domestic cat from 6,000 years ago in Turkey turned out to be a European wildcat. So did early specimens from Central Europe. When the team compared domestic cat genomes against wildcat populations across Africa, one group came out as the consistent closest match: North African wildcats, not the Near East. North Africa, making Egypt the leading candidate, though not yet the only proven place of domestication. And straight back to Bastet. Bastet had been worshipped since the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, first as a fierce lioness goddess, solar and protective of pharaohs. But around 3,000 years ago, her image changed. The lion's head became the face of a domestic cat, and at exactly that moment, something shifted in Egypt's relationship with the animal itself. The historian Herodotus later wrote that Egyptian families would run into a burning house to save the cat before anything else, and that a household mourning a cat's death would shave their eyebrows in grief. Temple complexes, meanwhile, ran catteries that bred cats by the thousands to be killed and mummified as votive offerings, sustained, organized, and relentless across centuries. Micro-CT scans of temple cat mummies, published in the journal Scientific Reports in 2020, found kittens under 5 months old with their necks deliberately snapped before they were wrapped for sale. One researcher on the team, Oxford's Gregor Larson, has floated a theory that would explain why domestication happened here, in Egypt, rather than at a farming village centuries earlier. Not grain stores and rodents, but ritual, mass breeding, mass killing, generation after generation, selecting for the cats calmest around people. He calls it the murder pathway of domestication. It's a provocative idea, and archaeozoologists outside the team have called it a reasonable hypothesis, but it comes from a paper that was posted, then withdrawn by its own authors while they re-examine the results. The DNA proves where domestic cats came from. It doesn't yet prove why. The scale of that industry resurfaced in 1888, when an Egyptian farmer digging near Beni Hassan broke into a cat cemetery holding, by some estimates, well over 100,000 mummified animals, packed 10 and 20 deep. Almost none of it was treated as sacred. Roughly 20 tons of the mummies were shipped to Liverpool and auctioned off to be ground into fertilizer for English farmland, sold for a few pounds a ton. 3,000 years of ritual devotion to a goddess, reduced to cargo. From Egypt, the domestic cat followed the Roman Empire. Legions marched north through Gaul, west into Hispania, and across the Channel into Britain, and cats of North African stock moved with them. A specific mitochondrial marker found in Egyptian cat mummies turns up in Roman imperial cats across Italy, France, and Britain. Within 2 centuries of Roman expansion, a cat descended from Egyptian stock was living in a military fort at the edge of the known world. But Europe is only half the story. On the same day DeMartino's study appeared in Science, a separate team at Peking University published parallel findings in the journal Cell Genomics. Led by Professor Shujin Luo, they analyzed feline bones from 14 archaeological sites across China, spanning 5,000 years of history. For 3,500 of those years, the animals living alongside Chinese farmers weren't domestic cats. They were leopard cats, a completely separate species, native to East Asia, with no ancestral connection to the modern house cat. Archaeologists had classified their bones as domestic cats for generations. Then the DNA was applied. True domestic cats arrived in China only around 1,300 years ago, during the Tang Dynasty, carried in from the Near East along the Silk Road. Their genomes point to a specific route. Chinese domestic cats share close genetic ties to an ancient cat found in Kazakhstan, marking a Silk Road corridor through Central Asia, centuries after the species had already reached Europe from Egypt. 3,500 years of assumed history with the cat turned out to be history with a different animal entirely. Every domestic cat alive today, an estimated 600 million animals worldwide, carries the genetic inheritance of a North African wildcat population, one that somehow, in Egypt, around 3,000 years ago, crossed the line into a species willing to live in our houses. Their global spread didn't follow the slow arc of early agricultural coexistence. It followed an empire, a trade route, a goddess with a cat's face. We still don't know why, or what that animal meant to the person buried beside it. What we know now is that the animal which eventually made it into every human home didn't come from that island or that moment. It came from North Africa, it came through Egypt, and exactly what happened there is still being argued over.